Margaret Hartford never suspected her husband kept a secret worth 20 years of lies. Until the morning she opened the wrong drawer. Inside, she found a journal that destroyed everything she believed about her marriage. The first entry made her hands shake. The money isn't mine. It never was. Margaret can never know the truth, or everything we've built together will collapse. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came next. Before we continue with Margaret's devastating discovery, welcome to our channel. We'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or state in the comments below. I would be glad to see them. Now let's get back to the story. Margaret Hartford was 63 and believed she knew her husband completely. 20 years of marriage. 20 years of trust. 20 years of what she thought was honest love. Richard had swept her off her feet at a charity gala. Both of them widowed, both cautious but hopeful. He was silver-haired, distinguished, successful. I made my fortune in real estate, he'd told her. She never questioned it. They lived beautifully. Winters in Tuscany, summers in the Berkshires. A sprawling estate in Connecticut filled with art and laughter. Her grown children, Susan and David, adored him. Life was perfect, except Richard had one rule. His third-floor study stayed locked. Just boring business files, he'd say with that charming smile. Nothing interesting, darling. Margaret never pushed. She trusted him. Until the leak in the conservatory forced her to find their insurance documents. Until she remembered the key ring he'd given her 20 years ago. Until she stood in front of that locked door and made a choice that would change everything. The door opened easily. Inside, everything looked ordinary: mahogany desk, leather chairs, built-in bookshelves. But then she saw the locked drawer, and she tried the keys. Inside were bank statements from the Cayman Islands showing $23 million. And 3 leather journals that would shatter her world. Margaret's hands trembled as she opened the first journal. It was dated 5 years before they'd even met. June 15, 1998. I've done something unforgivable. My partner James died, leaving me his company and his terrible secret. He'd been running a fraud scheme for 15 years. $80 million stolen from innocent people. Teachers, nurses, retirees, people who trusted him with their life savings. He begged me on his deathbed to make it right. But if the truth comes out, I'll go to prison just for being associated with it. So I've made a choice that will haunt me forever. I'll fix this in secret. I'll spend the rest of my life paying back what he stole, and no one will ever know. Margaret felt the room spin. She flipped forward, page after page of Richard's careful documentation. Payments made. Victims found. Money returned through anonymous channels. Then she reached an entry that made her heart stop. November 12, 2003. I met someone tonight. Margaret. She's beautiful, still grieving, but full of grace. I want to tell her everything. But how can I? If she knew what I'm carrying, she'd run. So I'll be selfish. I'll marry her and never tell her the truth. I'll let myself be happy, even though I don't deserve it. God forgive me for building our life on lies. Tears blurred the words. 20 years. He'd looked her in the eyes every single day and hidden this from her. She kept reading, each entry tearing deeper. April 3, 2015. 12 years married to Margaret. Every day I love her more. Every day I fear she'll discover what I've done. I'm getting older. My heart is failing. But I can't stop until I've repaid everything. I made a promise to a dying man, and I'll keep it, even if it kills me. The final entry was dated 3 weeks ago. October 10, 2024. It's almost finished. Just a few payments left. Maybe then I can tell Margaret the truth. Or maybe I'm too much of a coward. Maybe I'll let her find out after I'm gone. When she can't look at me with disappointment in her eyes. Margaret closed the journal. She sat in the silence of that locked room, surrounded by 20 years of deception. She didn't know it yet, but reading those journals was only the beginning. The real devastation was about to walk through the door. Margaret heard footsteps on the stairs. Richard's voice calling out, "Darling? Are you home?" She couldn't move, couldn't answer. She just sat there, His secrets spread across the desk like evidence at a crime scene. The footsteps reached the third floor, then stopped. Richard stood in the doorway, his face draining of all color. "Margaret!" His voice cracked. "Oh God, Margaret!" For 20 seconds, they just stared at each other. 20 years of marriage hanging by a thread. "How much did you read?" he finally whispered. "Everything." Her voice was ice. 25 years of lies. 20 years of betrayal. They weren't lies. "Don't." Margaret stood up, rage flooding through her. "Don't you dare tell me these weren't lies. You stood beside me at our wedding and promised me honesty. You looked me in the eyes every single day knowing you'd built our entire life on fraud and secrets." "Margaret, please. Who are you?" Her voice broke. "Who the hell are you, Richard? Because the man I married wouldn't do this. The man I loved wouldn't lie to my face for 20 years. Richard gripped the doorframe like a drowning man. "I'm the same person I've always been. I just couldn't tell you. I couldn't put you at risk." "At risk? Or were you just protecting yourself?" "That's not fair." "Fair?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about fair? I gave you everything, Richard. My trust, my love, my life. And you gave me lies. I gave you safety." Richard's voice rose, desperate. "If you'd known, if anyone had found out, you could have been charged as an accomplice. I couldn't let that happen. I loved you too much to destroy you. So you destroyed us instead." The words landed like a slap. Richard flinched, his eyes filling with tears. "Please, let me explain. Let me tell you everything." Margaret wanted to scream at him, wanted to throw those journals in his face and walk out. But she also wanted answers. She needed to understand how the man she'd loved for 20 years could be a complete stranger. "You have one chance," she said coldly. "One. And if you lie to me even once, Richard, I'm gone." They sat on opposite ends of the sofa, an ocean of space between them. Richard told her everything. James Hartford had been his best friend since college. They'd built businesses together, trusted each other completely. But James got greedy, started an investment fund, promised guaranteed returns. Classic fraud, using new investors' money to pay old investors. "I was traveling constantly," Richard said, his voice hollow. "My first wife was still alive. I wasn't paying attention. And James. He stole $80 million from people who trusted him. When James got cancer, he confessed on his deathbed. Begged Richard to fix it. Left him everything, the businesses, the tainted money, the impossible burden. I had two choices," Richard continued. "Go to the police and watch those people lose everything to lawyers and legal fees. Or take on James's sin and spend my life making it right. So you chose to become him." Margaret's voice was flat. "You changed your name, took over his identity, built our marriage on his fraud. I chose redemption over justice. Maybe that was wrong." "It was wrong," Margaret exploded. "You had no right to make that choice alone. You should have told the authorities. Let the system handle it. The system would have destroyed those people." Richard shot back. "Frozen assets, endless litigation, pennies on the dollar if they were lucky. I've spent 25 years tracking them down, paying them back with interest. Teachers who kept their homes. Nurses who could afford cancer treatment. Retirees who didn't have to choose between food and medicine." He pulled out a folder, threw it on the coffee table between them. "These are the people I've helped. Read it. See what your husband, your lying, terrible husband, has actually been doing." Margaret grabbed the folder with shaking hands. Inside were articles. Local teacher receives surprise settlement. Anonymous donor saves veteran's farm. Mystery benefactor helps nurse pay medical bills. Dozens of stories. Dozens of lives saved. "You could have told me," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "After we got married, you could have trusted me with this. And made you complicit? Put you at risk of prison." Richard's eyes were haunted. "I loved you too much for that, Margaret. I loved you enough to carry this alone. That's not love, Richard. That's control. That's deciding I wasn't strong enough to handle the truth." "You're right." The fight drained out of him. You're absolutely right. I was scared and selfish and wrong. But Margaret, please believe me. I never touched the stolen money for us. Everything we've spent together came from legitimate businesses I built. I kept it separate. I wouldn't do that to you. Margaret didn't know what to believe anymore. The man sitting across from her was both hero and coward, savior and liar. 20 years of marriage, and she'd never really known him at all. I need time, she said finally. I can't look at you right now. Richard nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'll sleep in the guest room. Take all the time you need. He stood to leave, then turned back. Margaret? I know you probably don't believe this right now, but every word of love I've ever said to you was true. That was never a lie. Margaret watched him walk away. She didn't know if that made it better or worse. If you're still watching right now, you're exactly the kind of viewer I love. Subscribe so I can keep giving you stories that touch your heart. Hit that bell so you never miss what happens next. For 3 days, Margaret barely ate or slept. She moved through the house like a ghost, her mind cycling through 20 years of memories, questioning everything. Every laugh, every kiss, every moment of intimacy. Had any of it been real? On the 4th day, she made a decision. She found Richard in his study, looking as hollow and sleepless as she felt. I want to see everything, she said. Every document, every payment, every piece of proof. I need to know exactly what you've done. Relief and fear crossed his face. Okay, yes, whatever you need. For 6 hours, he showed her everything. Files on every victim, spreadsheets tracking every stolen dollar and every dollar repaid. Bank records proving he'd kept their personal finances completely separate from the fraud money. There was Eleanor Robinson, Richard said, pulling up a file. Retired teacher. James took her entire pension. She was going to lose her home. I made sure she got an insurance settlement that gave her everything back, plus 20 years of interest. He showed her more. The single mother who could suddenly afford her son's education. The veteran with the mystery VA payment. The widow who discovered a forgotten bank account. You gave these people their lives back, Margaret said quietly. I tried to fix what James broke. That's all. Richard looked at her with desperate eyes. But I broke us in the process, didn't I? By keeping you in the dark. Margaret studied the files. 25 years of meticulous work. 16-hour days. The stress of hiding it all. No wonder he'd looked so tired lately. Did you ever plan to tell me, Richard? She asked. Or was I supposed to die not knowing who my own husband really was? I planned to tell you every day. His voice cracked. And every day, I was too terrified of losing you. So you kept me, but you never really let me in. I know. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Margaret closed the last file. Her anger was still there, burning beneath her ribs. But something else was there too, understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. There are 7 victims left, Richard said quietly. 7 more payments. Then it's done. 25 years, and it'll finally be over. And then what? We just go back to normal? Pretend this never happened. I don't know. Richard looked lost. I honestly don't know. Margaret made a decision that would change everything. I want to call Susan and David. I want to tell them the truth. And then we're going to decide as a family what happens next. Richard's face went white. Margaret, if we tell people... I'm done with secrets, Richard. Completely done. If we're going to survive this, if we're even going to try, it starts with truth. All of it. No matter the cost. Susan and David arrived 2 days later. Margaret watched their faces as Richard told them everything. Watched shock turn to disbelief. Disbelief turned to anger. The silence after he finished was suffocating. Then David spoke, his lawyer's mind already calculating consequences. Jesus Christ, Richard. Do you understand what you've done? Accessory after the fact, money laundering, fraud. You could go to prison. Mom could be implicated. This is... He ran his hands through his hair. This is a goddamn nightmare. I know, Richard said quietly. Do you? Susan's voice shook with fury. You didn't protect Mom. You isolated her. You stole her right to choose whether she wanted to be part of this. Susan, Margaret started. No, Mom. He needs to hear this. Susan turned to Richard, tears streaming down her face. You looked us in the eyes at holidays, at birthdays, at family dinners, and you lied. You made Mom an accomplice without her knowledge. You put her at risk every single day for 20 years. I was trying to keep her safe. Safe. David's laugh was bitter. You kept her ignorant. There's a difference. Stop. Margaret's voice cut through the room like a blade. Both of you stop. She stood, looking at her children, then at Richard. I loved your father with everything I had. When he died, I thought I'd never feel whole again. Then I met Richard, and I learned that love gets a second chance sometimes. For 20 years, he's been my partner, my companion, my best friend. She turned to Richard. He's also been a liar. He's made choices that weren't his to make alone. He's kept me in the dark about something that should have been shared. Back to her children. But he's also spent 25 years fixing someone else's crime, working himself to exhaustion to give people back what was stolen from them. That means something. Mom, Susan started. I'm not finished. Margaret's voice was steel. This family will not fall apart because of something one man did 25 years ago. We will not tear each other apart over secrets that are already out in the open. We're going to sit here, all four of us, and we're going to decide together what happens next. David leaned back, looking at his mother with new respect. What do you want to happen, Mom? Margaret looked at Richard. I want the truth to come out. All of it. No more secrets, no more hiding. Those people deserve to know what really happened to them. And Richard deserves to be free of this burden. Really free, not just finished with payments. You want him to confess? David looked stunned. Mom, he could go to prison. You could lose everything. Then we'll face that together. Margaret's voice was calm. But I will not live the rest of my life in fear of the truth coming out. I will not let Richard carry this alone anymore. And I will not let those victims go the rest of their lives not knowing that someone cared enough to make things right. Richard was crying openly now. Margaret, I can't ask you to risk. You're not asking. I'm deciding. She looked him in the eyes. Richard, I loved you yesterday. I love you today. But I will only stay if you choose truth over fear. If you choose us over safety. Can you do that? Richard looked at this woman he'd deceived for 20 years. This woman who was offering him redemption he didn't deserve. Yes, he whispered. Yes. Then we tell the truth, Margaret said. All of it. And we face whatever comes next together. The room was silent. Then Susan spoke, her voice still angry but softer. You're braver than I am, Mom. No, Margaret said. I'm just done being afraid. They started with Eleanor Robinson. Richard and Margaret drove to her house in New Haven, and Margaret insisted on being there when he told the truth. Eleanor was 84, sharp as a tack, and unsurprised. I always knew something was off about that insurance settlement, she said after Richard finished talking. But I needed the money too badly to ask questions. She looked at him for a long moment. You spent 22 years paying me back. You could have kept that money and disappeared. Why didn't you? Because it was wrong, Richard said simply. Because you didn't deserve to suffer for James's crimes. Eleanor nodded slowly. I'm not going to sue you, Mr. Hartford. You gave me back my life. But you need to tell the others. They deserve to know the truth. And so they did. Over 3 months, Richard and Margaret contacted every victim. Each conversation was painful, raw, honest. Some were grateful. Others were furious. One actually screamed at Richard. You think you're a hero? You're just another rich man who thought he could play God. Richard took it all. Every accusation, every tear, every angry word. You're right, he'd say. I should have gone to the police. I should have let the system handle it. I made the wrong choice, and I'm sorry. The story hit the local news. Billionaire secretly repays partners fraud over 25 years. The coverage was surprisingly sympathetic. Richard's age, his obvious remorse, the successful restitution all worked in his favor. The DA's office investigated. After weeks of review, they announced they wouldn't prosecute. Mr. Hartford broke the law, the DA said, but he did so to help victims of a crime he didn't commit. Given the unique circumstances and the passage of time, we're declining to press charges. 3 families filed civil suits, claiming incomplete compensation. Richard settled with all of them using the last money from the Cayman account. "It's done," he told Margaret one evening. "Every dollar accounted for, every victim paid. 25 years, and it's finally finished." Margaret took his hand. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," Richard admitted. "For 25 years, this secret defined me, drove me, gave me purpose. Now that it's over, now that everyone knows, I don't know who I am without it." "You're my husband," Margaret said. "You're Susan and David's stepfather. You're a man who spent a quarter-century trying to make things right. That's who you are. Do you really forgive me?" Richard asked quietly. "For all of it?" Margaret was quiet for a long time. "Forgiveness isn't the right word. You didn't commit a crime against me, Richard. You kept a secret and that hurt deeply. But you kept it trying to protect me, and you spent 25 years doing something incredibly difficult and good." She turned to face him. "What I need isn't forgiveness. I need to rebuild trust. I need to know that from this moment forward, you'll never hide anything from me again. No secrets, no matter how small. Can you promise me that?" "Yes," Richard said. "I swear it. Complete honesty even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "Then that's enough," Margaret said. "We start fresh from here." 6 months after the truth came out, Margaret stood in a Boston hotel conference room, looking at 50 people who'd come to hear her speak. "2 years ago," she began, "I discovered my husband had been carrying a secret that nearly destroyed us. Today, I'm going to tell you how we survived it, and why the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth it." She told their story. Richard sat in the front row watching her with pride. At 72, he looked healthier, lighter, more alive than he had in years. After her talk, people approached them with their own stories. A woman whose father had embezzled and left her to clean up the mess. A man who'd discovered his partner's fraud. A couple whose son had committed financial crimes. To each, Richard and Margaret offered the same message. Truth and restitution are worth the cost. That night, back in their hotel room, Richard pulled Margaret close. "I still can't believe you stayed. That you forgave me." "I've told you," Margaret said with a smile. "It's not about forgiveness. It's about choosing to move forward. It's about understanding that people are complicated. And love means standing together even when the past is messy." "That's very wise for 11 o'clock at night," Richard teased. Margaret laughed. "Well, I'm a very wise 65-year-old woman who learned that life is too short to hold grudges against people who spent 25 years trying to do the right thing. Even people who lied to you for 20 years? Even then." She paused. "Although you're never keeping another secret from me. Not even a surprise party. I've had enough secrets for a lifetime." "Deal," Richard agreed. "Complete transparency from now on. Even if it means you know what I'm getting you for Christmas." They stood at the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were struggling with impossible choices, carrying burdens they felt they couldn't share. Richard and Margaret couldn't solve everyone's problems, but they could offer hope. Proof that it's possible to survive terrible secrets, to rebuild after betrayal, to become stronger through truth. 2 years after Margaret found those journals, she and Richard sat on their terrace watching the sunset. The legal complications were resolved. The story had faded from the news. Life had settled into something new. "Are you happy?" Richard asked. Margaret thought about it. "I'm different," she said finally. "The woman who was married to you 2 years ago believed in a simple kind of love. Comfortable, safe, uncomplicated. That woman is gone." Richard's face fell. "But," Margaret continued, "the woman I am now believes in something deeper, a love that survives devastating truth. A love strong enough to rebuild on a foundation of honesty instead of comfortable lies. So yes, I'm happy. Differently happy." more real. She turned to him. I loved you when I thought you were safe. I love you now that I know you're complicated. This version is harder, Richard. But it's better. I don't deserve you, Richard whispered. Probably not, Margaret said with a small smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. Inside, Susan and David were preparing dinner, visiting more often now, their relationship with Richard deeper now that the barriers were gone. What do we do now? Richard asked. I spent 25 years working toward one goal. Now I don't know what comes next. We live, Margaret said. Really live. No more hiding, no more fear. We help other people carry their impossible burdens. We show them that truth doesn't destroy, it transforms. After 25 years of secrets, you want me to help others tell the truth? Why not? You've already done the hard part. You proved redemption is possible. That's a message people desperately need. Richard smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time in what felt like years. How did I get so lucky? You didn't, Margaret said firmly. Luck had nothing to do with it. You did 25 years of hard, painful, exhausting work to make things right. And I chose to stay and rebuild with you. That's not luck, Richard. That's choice. That's commitment. That's love. She took his hand. The real kind of love. The kind that survives the worst truths and comes out stronger. The kind that says, I see all of you. The good, the bad, the complicated, and I choose you anyway. Richard brought her hand to his lips. I will never keep another secret from you. Never. I know, Margaret said. Because if you do, Richard Hartford, I will find out. And next time, I won't be nearly this understanding. He laughed. And it was real, full of relief and joy and freedom. They sat together as darkness fell. Two people who'd lost and found each other. Who'd learned that sometimes the most devastating truths lead to the deepest love. In the end, Richard's secret had almost destroyed them. But it had also shown them what their marriage was really made of, and proved it could survive anything. If this story touched your heart, please give us a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Margaret and Richard's journey shows us it's never too late for truth. Never too late for redemption. Never too late to rebuild what seems broken. What do you think? Should Richard have told Margaret from the beginning? Or was he right to protect her? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, love, and the resilience of the human spirit. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.